Welcome to Healthy Kidneys After 60. I am your host, Jane Pauley. We often talk about our hearts, our brains, or our kidneys, but we rarely focus on the very things that carry us through life every single day, our legs and feet. For many of us, as the years pass, we start to notice a heaviness, a coldness, or a sudden lack of confidence in our step that wasn't there before. Is this just the price of aging, or is there a silent switch that has simply been turned off? Today, we are joined by a man who has spent his career translating the complexities of medicine into the language of the heart, Dr. Sanjay Gupta.
Jane, it is such a privilege to be here with you and your listeners. In my years of practice, I have seen thousands of patients who feel like their world is shrinking because their legs are failing them. They feel like they are losing their independence one heavy step at a time. But what I want to share today is a message of profound hope. Your legs are not just muscles and bone. They are a sophisticated pumping system, and even after 60, we have the power to wake that system back up. I have seen people in their 80s and 90s regain that spark of movement, and it often starts with the smallest, most simple shifts in how we treat our bodies while we sit and stand.
Dr. Gupta, I want to start with a feeling that I know so many of our listeners recognize, but perhaps they are too afraid to voice it out loud. It is that moment of hesitation when you are about to get up from your favorite armchair, or that slight heaviness in your calves when you walk to the mailbox. There is this creeping fear, isn't there? A fear that says, maybe I should stay seated. Maybe I am just getting too old for this. Or worse, what if I fall? It feels like an inevitable decline, a slow fading of the strength we once took for granted. Why does it feel like our legs are starting to betray us once we cross that 60-year milestone? And is it really just a natural part of growing old that we have to accept?
Jane, that fear you are describing is so real, and I hear it in the voices of my patients every single day. It is a quiet, heavy realization, but here is the scientific truth that offers a different perspective. As we age, specifically after 60, our bodies undergo a process called sarcopenia, which is the natural loss of muscle mass. But what is even more critical is that we lose muscle strength and power much faster than we lose the muscle itself. Our legs are the primary pumps for our circulation. When those muscles weaken, it is like the fuel pump in a car starting to sputter. The blood doesn't move as efficiently, and that leads to that coldness, the cramping at night, and that heavy feeling as if you are walking through wet sand. We often think we are resting our legs by sitting more, but research actually shows that prolonged sitting significantly impairs the vascular function in our lower limbs. When we sit still for hours, the blood pools, the muscles go dormant, and the switch for our circulation essentially turns off. So when you finally do stand up after 30 minutes of watching the news, your legs aren't ready. They are asleep at the wheel, and that is why you feel that terrifying wobble or instability in those first few steps.
That is a powerful image, the idea of the switch being turned off. It explains that frozen feeling so many people describe. I think the instinct for many of us when we feel that instability or that heaviness is to move less to stay safe. We think if I don't walk as much, I won't trip. But you are suggesting that this very caution, this desire to stay seated and protect ourselves, might actually be the thing that is accelerating the problem. It becomes a bit of a catch-22, doesn't it? The more we sit to avoid a fall, the more we weaken the very system meant to keep us upright. How do we break that cycle without feeling like we are putting ourselves in danger?
You have hit on the most tragic irony of aging, Jane. This vicious cycle of inactivity is perhaps the greatest enemy of independence. When we move less, our circulation slows, our muscles atrophy further, and our nervous system loses its map of where our feet are in space. This loss of proprioception, our sense of balance, is what leads to the falls we are so afraid of. Clinical observations and numerous studies confirm that even small bouts of movement, what we call activity breaks, can counteract the damage caused by sitting. We have to realize that movement isn't just about exercise in the way we thought of it at 30, it is about activation. I tell my patients that we aren't trying to run marathons here. We are trying to keep the pumps primed. The beauty of the human body, even at 70, 80, or 90, is its resilience. It is waiting for a signal. If you give it the right signal, the switch can be flipped back on. Today, I want to show everyone that the path back to feeling steady isn't through high-intensity workouts, but through very specific, almost tiny movements that re-engage the second heart in your legs. We are going to learn how to communicate with our bodies again, starting from the ground up.
It is incredibly reassuring to hear that it isn't about grand gestures, but about these tiny movements. I think for someone listening who feels stuck in that chair, the idea that they can flip the switch back on just by priming the pump is a doorway to a lot of hope. You mentioned that the legs act as a second heart, and I want to dive deeper into that. If we are sitting right now listening to this, what is happening to that second heart? And what is the very first thing we can do to tell our bodies that we aren't ready to give up our mobility just yet?
It's a fascinating mechanism, Jane. When you are sitting still, your calf muscles are completely relaxed. In that state, they aren't squeezing the veins to push blood back up toward your chest against the force of gravity. Mismatched circulation is why your ankles swell or your feet feel like blocks of ice. The switch I'm talking about is located right at your ankles. By simply moving the foot, you engage the calf, which acts as a biological pump. Think of it as a manual override for your circulation. During this conversation, we're going to talk about Robert, a patient of mine who lived in fear of his own living room floor, and how he used these exact tiny movements to find his footing again. The goal for today is to move from that feeling of I can't to I am doing it, one small pulse at a time. It's about reclaiming the territory of your own home and eventually the world outside your door.
Dr. Gupta, I've been hearing from so many of our viewers who describe a very specific, almost paralyzing moment of anxiety that happens right in their own living rooms. They tell me they can be sitting comfortably, perhaps reading a book or watching a favorite program, but the moment they decide to stand up, they feel a terrifying wave of insecurity. It's that first step, that initial transition from the chair to the floor where everything feels heavy and disconnected, like their legs aren't quite theirs for a few seconds. I wonder if you could help us understand why this particular moment feels so high stakes for someone over 60, and if there are specific warning signs in our daily lives, perhaps things we dismiss as just being tired, that actually tell a much deeper story about what is happening to our circulation and our nerves while we think we are simply resting.
Jane, you have touched on the exact moment where the fear of aging becomes a physical reality for many. I remember a specific gentleman who came to see me. His name was Robert Miller, a 68-year-old retired architect living at 2147 Pine Street in Sarasota, Florida. Robert was a man who used to hike and travel, but he told me that his world had shrunk down to the size of his armchair because of those first few steps. He described it beautifully and tragically. He said that every time he stood up to go to the kitchen, his heart would race, not from the effort, but from the sheer terror that his legs would buckle. When Robert sat for long periods in that Florida heat, the blood in his lower extremities began to pool because the muscle pump in his calves was completely inactive. When he stood up suddenly, his vascular system couldn't adjust the pressure fast enough to send blood back up to his heart and brain, leaving his legs feeling like lead weights. This isn't just a sign of being old, Jane. It is a physiological signal that the communication between the heart and the feet has been interrupted. Robert's legs were essentially shouting at him through that heaviness, but he didn't know how to listen to them until it almost resulted in a serious fall near his patio.
It's heartbreaking to think of someone like Robert, who was once so active, feeling like a prisoner in his own home because of a few seconds of instability. That image of the heart racing out of fear rather than exertion is something I think many will relate to deeply. You mentioned that his legs were shouting at him, and I think many of us are hearing those shouts but misinterpreting them as just the inevitable rust of time. Beyond that initial stumble, what are the other quiet signals we might be experiencing, maybe in the middle of the night or while we're just standing still, that we should be paying much closer attention to before that fear of falling becomes a permanent shadow over our lives?
That is a vital question because the body is never silent. It whispers before it screams. In Robert's case, he started noticing that his feet were icy cold, even under thick blankets in the Sarasota summer, and he began experiencing these strange, rhythmic throbbing sensations in his calves after just a short walk to his mailbox. These are not just quirks of the weather or fatigue, they are signs of peripheral insufficiency. If you feel a fullness or a tightness in your ankles after sitting, or if your toes feel tingly and numb like they are vibrating, your body is telling you that the second heart is struggling to return blood against gravity. For Robert, the turning point was when he realized he was avoiding his evening walks entirely because he didn't trust his step one. I told him that the heaviness he felt wasn't a permanent sentence, it was a call to action. We have to recognize that when we feel that initial wobble, it is often because our proprioception, the sensors in our joints that tell the brain where our body is, has gone offline from lack of blood flow and movement. If we ignore these signals and just sit more to be safe, we are actually making the first step even more dangerous the next time we try it.
It seems like such a cruel paradox that the very thing we do to stay safe, staying still, is what ultimately makes us more vulnerable. Robert's story is a wake-up call for anyone who has started shrinking their life to avoid those few seconds of fear. If we are starting to notice our feet feeling like ice or that strange vibration you described, how do we begin to change the conversation with our own bodies? Is it possible to reclaim that first step and turn those signals of decline back into signals of strength, even if we've been ignoring them for years?
Absolutely, Jane, and that is the most important message for Robert and for everyone listening. The human body has an incredible capacity for recalibration. When Robert finally understood that his wobbly steps were a result of a sleeping circulatory pump rather than a broken body, he felt empowered to change. I told him that instead of fearing the stand-up, he needed to prime the engine while he was still seated. We started with something as simple as waking up the ankles. The signals of coldness and heaviness are reversible if we address the stagnation. Robert began to realize that his legs weren't failing him, they were waiting for him to lead them. By the time we finished our sessions, he wasn't just walking to the kitchen, he was back on his patio, looking out at the pine trees, confident because he knew how to turn the power back on before he even stood up. It starts with the realization that the first step doesn't have to be a leap of faith. It can be a calculated, strong movement if you've prepared the ground beneath you.
Dr. Gupta, I want to challenge a very common belief that many of us were raised with, which is the idea that when we are tired or feeling weak, the most responsible thing to do is to sit down and rest. Especially for our seniors, there is this cultural message that you've earned your rest and that taking it easy is the key to longevity. But from what you're saying, it sounds like this traditional wisdom might actually be a dangerous trap for our leg health. Could you explain the science behind why resting for safety might actually be the very thing that is increasing the risk of sarcopenia and making us more prone to the falls we are so desperately trying to avoid?
Jane, this is perhaps the most difficult myth to dismantle because it comes from a place of love and caution. We tell our parents and grandparents to sit down, let me get that for you, thinking we are helping. But physiologically, the use it or lose it principle is never more aggressive than after age 60. When we choose to sit for hours to save our energy, our bodies interpret that stillness as a signal to prune away muscle tissue that isn't being used. This is the biological basis of sarcopenia. Research published in prominent geriatric journals shows that muscle power, the ability to react quickly, diminishes significantly faster than pure muscle mass. So while you are sitting safely on the sofa, the very fibers you need to catch yourself if you trip are being deactivated. Even more concerning is the effect on our vascular health. Prolonged sitting causes a drop in shear stress against the artery walls in our legs, which actually impairs the ability of those vessels to dilate. In simple terms, sitting still makes your blood vessels stiff and less responsive. The rest we think is healing us is actually causing a silent decay of our most vital support systems.
That is a sobering thought, that our kindness in telling someone to sit down could be contributing to their decline. It's almost as if we are unintentionally encouraging a slow-motion hibernation of the body. If the science shows that sitting still is causing this stiffness in our vessels and a pruning of our muscles, what is the alternative for someone who truly does feel exhausted or who has genuine pain when they move? Is there a middle ground between pushing through the pain and fading away in a chair that can keep those vital systems active without causing exhaustion?
There is a very powerful middle ground, Jane, and it lies in the concept of interrupted sitting or activity snacks. You don't have to go for a mile-long walk to save your legs. Studies have shown that simply breaking up sitting time every 30 minutes with just 2 minutes of light movement can significantly improve vascular function and glucose metabolism in older adults. For someone who feels tired, the secret isn't more rest, but smarter movement. When you are seated, your muscles are in a state of metabolic sleep. By simply engaging in small rhythmic contractions, you send a surge of blood through those stiff vessels you mentioned. This isn't about burning calories, it's about maintaining the biological infrastructure. I often tell my patients that their armchair should be a pit stop, not a destination. If you must sit to rest your joints, you should still be tinkering under the hood by moving your feet and legs. This keeps the nerves awake and the blood flowing so that when you finally do stand, your body isn't starting from a cold, dead stop.
I love that phrase, tinkering under the hood. It makes the process feel much more manageable and less like a chore. It seems like the goal is to never let the system go completely cold. But many people might ask, how small can these movements really be and still make a difference? When you talk about activity snacks or priming the pump, are we talking about something so subtle that you could even do it while having a conversation or watching a movie? And how does that tiny bit of movement translate into actually preventing a fall later in the day?
It is incredibly subtle, Jane, and that is the beauty of it. We are talking about movements so small they are almost invisible. For instance, just repeatedly lifting your heels while sitting activates the soleus muscle, which is a powerhouse for glucose and lipid metabolism and a key part of that calf pump. This small action increases the velocity of blood flow in the deep veins, preventing the stagnation that leads to heaviness. When you keep that second heart even slightly active, you are maintaining the pressure in your circulatory system. This means that when you stand up, your blood pressure remains more stable, reducing that dizzy feeling that causes so many falls. Furthermore, these tiny movements keep the neuromuscular junctions, the bridges between your nerves and muscles, firing. It's like keeping a car idling rather than turning the engine completely off. When you're ready to move, the connection is already warm and responsive. You aren't just moving your feet, you are protecting your brain's ability to control your body. It is the ultimate insurance policy for your independence, and it costs nothing but a few seconds of intention.
Dr. Gupta, you've introduced this fascinating concept of the second heart in our Bapchan, and I think for many of us, we've always just thought of our legs as pillars to hold us up, not as active pumps for our entire system. I've noticed that even people who try to lead healthy lives, eating well and staying busy, often neglect this specific area. They might be busy in the kitchen or active in the garden, but then they spend hours sitting still in the evening. Can you tell us about how this silent neglect of the calf muscles can lead to problems like swelling and cramps, even in people who think they are doing everything right, and perhaps share a story of someone who discovered this the hard way?
You're absolutely right, Jane. We often focus so much on the big heart in our chest that we forget the mechanical assistance located in our lower legs. I think of Linda Johnson, a 74-year-old woman I met who lives at 88 Maple Ave in Des Moines, Iowa. Linda was the picture of health in many ways. She took her vitamins, she cooked fresh meals, and she prided herself on being on her feet most of the morning. But Linda had a secret habit. She loved her evening marathons of classic television. She would sit for 3, sometimes 4 hours straight without moving a muscle from the waist down. She came to me because her ankles were swelling so much by bedtime that her skin felt like it was going to burst, and she was being woken up by agonizing Charlie horse cramps in the middle of the night. Linda thought she had a heart problem or perhaps a kidney issue. She was terrified, but when we looked at her habits, it became clear. By sitting perfectly still for those long stretches, she was essentially putting a kink in the garden hose of her circulation. Her second heart, those calf muscles, wasn't being allowed to do its job of squeezing the veins and pushing that fluid back up toward her torso.
It's so easy to see ourselves in Linda's story, feeling like we've been active enough during the day to justify a long, motionless evening. That description of her skin feeling like it was going to burst sounds incredibly painful and frightening. It's almost as if her body was protesting that period of total stillness. Beyond the swelling and the cramps, what is actually happening deep inside the muscle and the veins when we ignore that calf pump for hours on end? And why does this neglect specifically target us more aggressively as we get into our 70s and 80s?
What is happening, Jane, is a phenomenon called venous stasis. Without the rhythmic contraction of the calf muscles, the valves in our veins, which are designed to keep blood moving in one direction up, begin to struggle under the weight of the stagnant blood. Over time, this pressure causes fluid to leak into the surrounding tissues, which is the swelling Linda experienced. As we age, our vein valves naturally become less elastic and our muscle fibers thin out. This means our margin for error disappears. In our 30s, we could sit for a movie and recover instantly. At 74, like Linda, those hours of stillness are much more damaging. The cramps she felt at night were her muscles literally suffering from a lack of fresh, oxygenated blood and an accumulation of metabolic waste products that hadn't been cleared out by proper circulation. Linda was shocked when I told her that her healthy morning routine couldn't fully protect her from her motionless evening. We have to understand that the calf pump isn't a battery that stays charged. It's a generator that only works when it's turning.
That's such a vivid distinction, a generator versus a battery. It means we can't store up our movement from the morning to cover us for a stagnant afternoon. For Linda and for so many others in her position, there must have been a sense of guilt or confusion about why her body was failing despite her efforts. How did you help her realize that the solution wasn't more medication or a radical lifestyle change, but rather a simple shift in how she treated those hours in front of the TV? What was the aha moment for her in reclaiming the health of her second heart?
The aha moment for Linda was when I asked her to do a simple test. I had her sit in her usual chair and just perform 30 seconds of vigorous toe tapping and heel lifting. I told her to pay attention to the sensation in her lower legs. She looked at me with such surprise and said, "I can feel the warmth coming back." It was the first time she realized she had a remote control for her own circulation. I explained to her that she didn't have to give up her favorite shows, she just had to invite her legs to the party. We discussed the research showing that even light seated exercise can improve the ejection fraction of the calf pump. Linda started setting a small timer on her side table. Every 20 minutes, she would do what we call seated ankle pumps while the show was still playing. Within 2 weeks, her nighttime cramps had vanished and the swelling in her ankles was significantly reduced. She realized that her body wasn't broken by age, it was just starved for movement. For Linda, regaining control over her symptoms was like getting a piece of her youth back, all because she stopped ignoring that vital second heart at 88 Maple Ave.
Dr. Gupta, I love the way you've simplified this for us, but I want to make sure our listeners really understand the how-to. Sometimes when we hear exercise, we imagine something complicated or physically demanding, but you're talking about something far more accessible. If you were sitting with your own mother or a dear friend who was struggling with that cold, heavy feeling in their feet, how would you describe the ankle pump in a way that feels like an invitation rather than a chore? And could you walk us through the actual biological magic that happens in those 3 minutes? What is the blood doing? What are the nerves feeling that makes such a dramatic difference in how a person feels when they finally stand up?
Jane, I would tell them to think of their feet as the handles of an old-fashioned water pump. Imagine you are sitting comfortably and you just slowly pull your toes up toward your shins as far as they will go. Feel that stretch in the back of your calf and then firmly point them away like a ballet dancer. It should be a slow, deliberate 1-2 rhythm. I often share the story of Patricia Pat Davis, a remarkable 90-year-old woman at 17 Elm Court in Charleston, South Carolina. Pat was someone who dealt with very cold, almost purple-tinted feet every winter. She was afraid to move because she felt so stiff. I sat with her and we did these ankle pumps together for just 3 minutes. Biologically, what was happening was profound. Each time Pat pulled her toes up, her calf muscles contracted, creating a high-pressure squeeze on the deep veins. This squeeze literally blasts the stagnant blood past those sleepy vein valves and sends it upward. This is a clinical technique used to prevent blood clots in hospitals because it is so effective at moving blood. For Pat, after just a few minutes, she looked at me and said, "Dr. Gupta, my toes don't feel like ice cubes anymore." That was the blood finally reaching the tiny capillaries that had been shut down by inactivity.
It's so moving to think of Pat at 90 experiencing that immediate relief. My toes don't feel like ice cubes anymore. That must have felt like a miracle to her. But I think there's a deeper fear for someone like Pat or for anyone who struggles with balance. They might wonder if even this small movement could make them dizzy or if they're doing it right. How do you reassure someone that this is safe? And what are those success signals, the physical feelings that tell them the pump is working and the switch is successfully being turned back on?
Safety is always our first priority, Jane, and that's why the ankle pump is so beautiful. It's done while you are completely supported in a chair or even lying in bed. In fact, I told Pat to do her first set before she even swung her legs out of bed in the morning. This pre-primes the system so her blood pressure is ready for the change in position. The success signals are very distinctive. First, you'll feel a gentle warmth like a heating pad is being turned on inside your legs. That's the friction and flow of increased circulation. Second, that tight feeling around the ankles usually begins to soften as if a rubber band has been loosened. And finally, there is a sense of lightness. When Pat stood up after her 3 minutes, she didn't have that lead weight feeling that usually made her long chuang or stumble. She felt connected to the floor. Scientifically, we know that this movement also stimulates the mechanoreceptors in the ankle joint, which sends a status report to the brain about the body's position. So it's not just about blood, it's about waking up the brain's map of the feet.
That connection to the floor, that feeling of being plugged in again, is exactly what so many people lose as they age. It's the difference between walking with confidence and walking with fear. You mentioned that Pat did this before she even got out of bed, which seems like such a brilliant life hack for health. If someone is listening and they want to try this right now or tomorrow morning, what is the rhythm they should aim for? Is it a fast pump to get things moving, or is there more power in the slow, steady stretch that you mentioned? And how does this one simple habit change the trajectory of their whole day?
The power is absolutely in the slow and steady, Jane. If you go too fast, you're using momentum rather than muscle. I told Pat to count to 3 on the way up, hold for a second, and count to 3 on the way down. You want to feel the muscle actually engage and wring out the veins. Think of it like squeezing a sponge. You want a full, firm squeeze to get all the water out. When you make this a habit, you're not just fixing a temporary problem, you're toning the vascular system. Pat found that by doing this 3 times a day, morning, lunch, and before bed, her overall baseline of comfort shifted. She stopped having those long chuang moments when standing up to answer the door. It gave her back her spatial confidence. For someone at 17 Elm Court, that meant the difference between staying in her bedroom all day or going out to her garden. It's a tiny investment, just a few minutes, that pays dividends in freedom. It turns the I can't of 90 into the I am of a life still being lived.
Dr. Gupta, we've been talking about the internal pumps, but I want to look at what happens on the outside, the way we actually move across the room. I've noticed, and I'm sure many of our listeners have noticed in themselves or their loved ones, that shuffling walk. It's subtle at first, the steps get a little shorter, the feet don't lift as high, and maybe there's a slight dragging sound on the carpet. We often joke about the old man walk, but it sounds like you're saying this change in our gait is actually a serious red flag. Why is this flat way of walking so dangerous? And what is it telling us about the health of our nerves and our circulation that we might be missing?
Jane, that shuffling is one of the most significant indicators of a system in distress. It's called a cautious gait, and it's often a sign that the brain no longer trusts the feedback it's getting from the feet. I think of Frank Thompson, an 82-year-old man who lived at 305 Ocean View Doctor in Santa Monica, California. Frank was a proud man, but he started noticing he was catching his toes on the edges of rugs he'd lived with for 20 years. He described his feet as feeling numb or fuzzy, like he was walking on cotton wool. This is often because when circulation is poor, the peripheral nerves don't get enough oxygen, and they stop sending clear signals to the brain. To compensate, Frank started shortening his stride and keeping his feet close to the ground to feel safer. But the tragedy is that this actually makes you more likely to trip. When you don't lift your toes, what we call foot drop, the smallest threshold or uneven tile becomes a major hazard. Frank's shuffling wasn't just a sign of age, it was a sign that his proprioceptive map was fading.
Walking on cotton wool, that is such a vivid and frightening way to describe it. It must be so disorienting to feel disconnected from the very ground you're standing on. You mentioned that Frank started shortening his steps to feel safer, which is such a natural human reaction to feeling unsteady. But it seems like this shorter, flatter walk creates a downward spiral where the less we move correctly, the more our nerves and muscles forget how to function. What are the specific warning signs, maybe things that happen when we're just walking through the kitchen or turning around to sit down, that should make us stop and say, wait, my balance is in trouble?
The warning signs are often subtle before they become dramatic, Jane. For Frank, the first clue was that he had to look down at his feet constantly while walking to see where they were because he couldn't feel them. Another sign is when you find yourself furniture walking, touching the back of chairs or the walls as you move through a room. If you feel a tugging sensation in your calves when you try to walk at a normal pace, or if your toes feel like they're buzzing at night, those are clear signals of nerve and vascular compromise. But the most critical red flag is the loss of confidence in the turn. If you feel long chuang or dizzy when you have to turn around quickly to answer a phone or a doorbell, it means your vestibular system and your leg muscles aren't communicating fast enough. Frank had reached a point where he was avoiding any movement that wasn't a straight line. I told him that by avoiding the challenge, he was actually accelerating the loss of his balance reflexes. PMC.
It's that avoidance again, the way we slowly retreat from the world to stay safe, only to find ourselves less safe in the end. Frank's story at 305 Ocean View, Doctor, is so relatable because it's about that loss of spatial confidence. You mentioned a specific exercise called the heel-to-toe walk as a way to rebuild the map. How does something as simple as walking in a specific way help an 82-year-old like Frank regain that sense of where his feet are? And how can our listeners do this safely at home without the fear of falling while they practice?
The heel-to-toe walk is like recalibrating your internal GPS, Jane. I had Frank practice this in his hallway, always with one hand lightly touching the wall for safety. The goal is to consciously feel the heel strike the floor, then roll the weight through the arch, and finally push off with the toes. This rolling action forces the ankle to move through its full range of motion, and more importantly, it forces the brain to pay attention to every stage of the step. It breaks that shuffling habit. For Frank, this was like reteaching his feet how to talk to his brain. Research shows that this kind of gait training can significantly improve balance and reduce the risk of falls in seniors. PMC Frank found that after a week of doing this mindful walking for just 5 minutes a day, the cotton wool feeling began to lift. He felt sharper on his feet. He wasn't just walking, he was reclaiming his stride. It's about moving with intention rather than moving out of fear.
Dr. Gupta, I want to talk about the standing myth. Recently, there's been a lot of talk in the health world about how sitting is the new smoking, and many people have reacted by trying to stand as much as possible. I've seen some of our older viewers proud of the fact that they stand while they read or watch the news, thinking they are doing their legs a huge favor. But I've also heard that standing perfectly still can be just as problematic for our circulation as sitting. Is it true that standing still is just as much of a blood-pooling trap as the armchair? And if so, what is the magic ingredient that we're missing when we just swap sitting for standing without adding movement?
You've hit on a very sophisticated point, Jane. The enemy isn't the chair itself. The enemy is stagnation. When you stand perfectly still for a long time, gravity is still pulling your blood down into your feet, and because your calf muscles aren't contracting to pump it back up, the blood just sits there. This is why people who stand all day, like retail workers or guards, often have terrible varicose veins and heavy legs. Physiologically, sitting and standing still both lead to what we call venous hypertension in the lower limbs. The magic ingredient, as you call it, is interruption. The body thrives on change. Scientific journals in physiology have shown that activity breaks, even very brief ones, are the only way to counteract the negative vascular effects of being sedentary. Whether you are sitting or standing, if you don't engage the pump, your blood is essentially dung-in or frozen in place. It's the rhythm of movement that keeps the vessels healthy, not just the position of your body.
So it's not about the pose, it's about the pulse. That's a very different way of looking at it. I think many people find it exhausting to think about exercising all day, but you're talking about breaking the spell of stillness. If someone is watching a 2-hour movie or standing at the counter preparing a long meal, what is the threshold where the danger starts? How long can we actually stay still before our blood begins to freeze? And what are the simplest, most invisible ways to break that stagnation without interrupting our lives or making us feel like we're working out in the middle of the kitchen?
The danger zone usually starts after about 30 to 40 minutes of total stillness. That's when the blood flow velocity in your deep veins really starts to drop and the shear stress on your vessel walls decreases. To break the spell, you only need about 60 seconds of activation. If you're standing at the kitchen counter, you don't need to stop what you're doing. You can just do micro-marching, lifting your heels an inch or two off the floor rhythmically. If you're sitting, you can do those ankle pumps we talked about, or even just toe wiggles inside your shoes. The goal is to create a pressure wave in the veins. I tell my patients to follow the 31 rule. For every 30 minutes of stillness, give your second heart 1 minute of work. This small pulse of activity clears the pipes and prevents that cumulative heaviness that leads to swelling and fatigue by the end of the day. It's about being a fidgeter for your health.
Being a fidgeter for your health, I think we can all manage that. It takes the pressure off performing and makes it about functioning. It seems like the most dangerous habit is the one we don't even notice, the trance of being absorbed in a task or a show and forgetting that our legs even exist. For those of us who get easily distracted, how can we make this 31 rule an automatic part of our lives? And what is the long-term prize for someone who starts interrupting their stillness today? How does their vascular health actually change over the next few months?
The long-term prize, Jane, is nothing less than the preservation of your independence. When you consistently break the spell of stillness, you are keeping your blood vessels elastic and your muscles responsive. Over time, this prevents the chronic leakiness in the veins that leads to permanent skin changes and ulcers in older age. It also keeps your blood pressure more stable, which protects your heart and brain. To make it automatic, I suggest habit stacking. Do your ankle pumps every time a commercial comes on. Do your micro-marching every time you're waiting for the kettle to boil. By tying the movement to a regular daily event, it stops being exercise and starts being life. In 3 months, a person who follows the 31 rule will likely find that their legs feel years younger, less heavy, less cold, and much more ready to take that first step with confidence. You're not just moving blood, you're polishing the whole system from the inside out. Journals, physiology.org.
Dr. Gupta, I want to address a group of our listeners who might feel a bit left out when we talk about walking or standing exercises. These are the folks who have severe arthritis, or perhaps they've had a stroke, or they're simply at a point where standing up feels like a major risky production. They might feel like if they can't walk, they can't improve their circulation, but you have this wonderful seated marching technique that seems to offer a bridge back to health for people who need to stay seated. How does marching while sitting down actually engage those deep power muscles in the hips and thighs? And can you share how this transformed the life of someone who was almost completely sedentary?
Jane, this is a vital point because mobility is a spectrum and everyone deserves a way to turn the power back on. I think of Patricia Pat Davis, whom I mentioned earlier, the 90-year-old in Charleston at 17 Elm Court. Pat was so afraid of her own long chuang, or instability, that she had almost stopped standing up entirely unless her daughter was there to hold her arm. She felt like her legs were becoming useless. I taught her seated marching. It's so simple. You sit tall in a sturdy chair, hold on to the armrest for support, and slowly lift one knee toward the ceiling, then the other, as if you are marching in slow motion. For Pat, this was a revelation. By lifting her knees, she was engaging her iliopsoas and quadriceps, the powerhouse muscles that are responsible for lifting the body out of a chair. Even while seated, these large muscles demand a huge amount of blood flow when they contract, which acts like a massive booster pump for the entire circulatory system. It's not just for the legs, it's a workout for the return trip of the blood back to the heart.
I can imagine Pat sitting there in Charleston realizing that she didn't have to be on her feet to be moving. That must have been such a relief for her to feel that power returning to her thighs and hips. You mentioned that she was afraid of her own instability, and I think many people feel that heart in the throat sensation when they try to stand. How does this seated marching specifically help train the body for the act of standing up? And what is the dose? How many marches should someone like Pat aim for to see a real difference in their strength and their confidence?
It trains the body by strengthening the lift-off muscles without the risk of a fall, Jane. When Pat marched in her chair, she was building the exact strength needed to propel herself upward. I told her to aim for 30 pulses on each side, but to start wherever she felt comfortable, even if it was just 5. The key is consistency over intensity. I suggested she do 2 sets during her favorite morning show and another 2 in the afternoon. Within just 10 days, Pat noticed something incredible. When she did have to stand up, she didn't have to heave herself with her arms as much. Her legs were awake and ready to carry the load. Research shows that even seated resistance and movement can improve functional reach and balance scores in the elderly. PMC Pat's marching was her way of telling her brain, we are still in the game. It gave her back the thigh power she thought was gone forever.
It's so empowering to think that 30 pulses in a chair can be the difference between needing help to stand and doing it yourself. It really is about reclaiming those powerhouse muscles. But for someone who feels tired all the time, which is a common complaint as we get older, the idea of marching might still feel like a lot of effort. How do you encourage someone when they say, Dr. Gupta, I just don't have the energy today? What is the connection between the seated marching and actually increasing our overall energy levels rather than draining them?
That is the great energy paradox, Jane. When we are sedentary, our metabolism slows to a crawl and we feel heavy and sluggish because our blood is stagnant and our oxygen levels are lower. I told Pat that her tiredness was actually her body starving for the movement that creates energy. When you march in your chair, you are increasing your heart rate slightly and pushing oxygen-rich blood into your brain and your organs. Pat found that after her march, she actually felt more alert and less foggy. I told her, Met the Kang Phai Lam It Madiu. If you're tired, do just a little, but do it regularly to keep the fire from going out. By the end of the month, Pat wasn't just marching. She was standing up with a smile, feeling that her second heart and her powerhouse muscles were finally working in harmony at 17 Elm Court. She realized that energy isn't something you save, it's something you generate through movement.
Dr. Gupta, we have covered so much ground today, from the ankle pumps to seated marching and mindful walking. It feels like we've gathered all the pieces of a puzzle, but for our listeners who are ready to start tomorrow, I want to make sure they have a clear roadmap. If you were to package all of this into a simple 5-minute routine that someone could do right in their living room, what would that look like? How do we stack these movements together so they feel like a natural flow of the day? And what should someone realistically expect to feel in week 1, week 2, and beyond, so they don't get discouraged if the miracle doesn't happen overnight?
Jane, I like to call this the living room routine, and it's built on 5 simple golden pieces. First, start before you even leave your bed with 20 ankle pumps to wake up the pipes. Second, while you're having your morning coffee or watching the news, do 30 seated marches to prime the powerhouses. Third, when you stand up, use your kitchen counter for balance and do 10 calf raises, lifting your heels to charge the generator. Fourth, walk heel to toe down your hallway once or twice to update your brain's map. And finally, take a 5-minute purposeful walk, even if it's just around your house, focusing on that rolling step. Research confirms that this kind of multi-component routine is the most effective way to improve vascular health and gait stability in seniors. PMC, in week 1, you should expect to feel warmer. That icy feeling in your toes should start to melt. By week 2, that heavy lead feeling when you stand up will begin to lighten. And by week 4, you'll find that spatial confidence we talked about returning. It's a journey of small wins that lead to a big freedom.
A journey of small wins. That's a beautiful way to put it. It makes the goal of freedom feel so much more attainable. But I also want to be very responsible for our audience. While we are encouraging everyone to flip the switch, we also know that there are times when a red flag means you need to stop and call a professional. What are those specific, non-negotiable danger signs that someone might notice in their legs, perhaps a sudden change in color or a specific kind of pain, that mean tonight is not the night for marching, but the night for calling their doctor?
That is a critical safety check, Jane. While these movements are incredibly safe for most, you must listen for the emergency sirens of the body. If you notice a sudden painful swelling in only one leg, especially if it's accompanied by redness and warmth, that could be a sign of a deep vein thrombosis DVT and requires immediate medical attention. If you experience a sudden sharp stabbing pain in your calf that makes it impossible to touch the floor, or if you see a dusky purple or blue discoloration in your toes that doesn't go away with movement, do not wait. Also, if you feel short of breath or have chest pain during even these light movements, stop immediately. These red flags are rare, but they are the body's way of saying there is a structural blockage that needs a doctor's help. For everyone else, the rule is slow and steady. If it hurts, back off the intensity, but don't stop the intention.
Thank you for that clarity, Dr. Gupta. It's about being attuned to our bodies, not just pushing through. I think the most encouraging thing you've said is that we can expect to feel warmer in just the first week. That is such a tangible, real-world result. For someone listening who has felt cold and disconnected for years, that first week of warmth must feel like the sun coming out. As we wrap up this roadmap, what is your final word on the pace of this change? We live in a world that wants instant results. But in the world of senior health and second hearts, why is slow and consistent actually the fastest way to get our lives back?
Because instant is usually temporary, Jane, but consistent is transformational. We aren't just fixing a symptom, we are remodeling the way your body handles gravity and circulation. It took time for the switch to turn off, and it takes a little time for the system to trust that the power is back on for good. I told Robert, Linda, Frank, and Pat the same thing. Don't try to be perfect today. Just be better than you were yesterday. When you move slowly and correctly, you are building quality muscle and resilient vessels. You are giving your nervous system time to relearn the map of your body. In the end, the fastest way to regain your freedom is to never have to stop because of an injury or a fall. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. By the time you reach that second month, you won't even be thinking about exercising. You'll just be living again, and that is the greatest miracle of all.
Dr. Gupta, as we come to the end of this hour, I'm struck by something you said at the very beginning, that our world shrinks when our legs fail us. For many of our listeners, the last few years may have felt like a series of withdrawals, giving up the garden, giving up the evening stroll, giving up the stairs. It's not just about health in a clinical sense, it's about dignity and the freedom to be part of the world. As we look at these four incredible stories, Robert, Linda, Frank, and Pat, it seems the common thread wasn't just that they got stronger, but that they got their lives back. If you could leave our listeners with one final heart-to-heart thought to carry with them tonight, what would it be?
Jane, if there is one thing I want every person listening to hold on to, it's this. Your age is a number, but your mobility is your independence. I have sat with so many people who felt they had reached the end of the road simply because they had a few falls or their legs felt like lead. They started to self-isolate out of a fear of being a burden or making a scene by tripping in public. But what I want you to know is that Kung Tak Ko Chun, that switch in your ankles, is still there, waiting for you. It is never, ever too late to start inviting your body back to life. Whether you are 60 or 90, your muscles still know how to grow, your veins still know how to pump, and your brain still knows how to learn. Don't wait until a fall forces you to change. Start tonight in your favorite chair and just pulse those ankles. Tell your body that you are still the captain of the ship. PMC.
The captain of the ship, I love that. It's about taking back the controls that we thought we had lost. I think that image of the Kung Tak Ko Chun is going to stay with so many people. It's so simple, yet so profound. You've given us 3 golden rules to live by. Bat Kung Tak for 60 seconds whenever you sit, tap do, because your muscles can always be reborn, and Ju Antoine by using support so you can build confidence. It's a message of such deep respect for the aging process, but also a refusal to let age be a dead end. Thank you, Dr. Gupta, for sharing your heart and your science with us today. You've given us more than just exercises. You've given us a pathway back to ourselves.
Thank you, Jane. It has been a true joy. To everyone listening, your legs have carried you through a lifetime of memories. Don't give up on them now. They are ready to carry you through many more if you just give them that rhythmic nudge. Start small, be patient with yourself, and remember that every pump of your ankle is a vote for your future freedom. I look forward to hearing the stories of your warm feet and your steady steps. It was an honor to be part of your Healthy Kidneys After 60 journey today. Take care of yourselves and keep moving.
And thank you all for joining us for this special edition of Healthy Kidneys After 60. We hope you feel a little more connected to the ground beneath you tonight. Remember, your second heart is always there, ready to be flipped back on. If you found this conversation helpful, please subscribe to our channel and share this podcast with a friend or a loved one who might be feeling that shuffling fear. We have so many more deep dive conversations coming your way to help you live your most vibrant, independent life after 60. I'm Jane Pauley, and from all of us here, stay steady, stay warm, and we'll see you in the next episode. Good night.